Hello and welcome to the interview. In recent years, the comfortable West has been shaken by events it didn't conceive of, a global pandemic and now a devastating war in Europe. This winter, Europeans face an energy crunch. Given this rapidly changing world order, the French president wants his diplomats to go on the offensive to defend French interests and influence more forcefully. That was his message on September the 1st to the annual meeting of French ambassadors in Paris. So what did the diplomatic corps make of it? Well, I'm joined by Foreign Ministry spokesperson Anne-Claire Legendre. Just try and explain to us, first of all, what do you understand by this diplomacy of combat that Macron talked about? And is it suggesting somehow that you were not combative enough before?
I think the president, as well as Minister Colonna, described a very specific situation, which is the geopolitical situation we are at the moment. So you mentioned the pandemic, which was an unprecedented event, but moreover, we have now a war on the European continent, which was not, of course, foreseen. And so this puts us in a different situation geopolitically. And he called us to deploy this diplomacy of combat, as you quoted him rightly, in order to fight against what we see as a risk of the fracturation of the world order.
What does it really mean, though, combat, for a diplomat?
It means being, forceful, aggressive, and you mentioned perhaps the social media, on which what we see as a part of this, as the president said, a hybrid war waged by Russia in support of its aggression against Ukraine. They are also waging a disinformation war. And so the president, as well as the minister, called us to be much more on the social media and much more forceful in defending, our position and also in countering disinformation.
You do have a Telegram and a channel in Russian. You've got a Twitter feed in Russian as well for the French Foreign Ministry. But I'm not sure that you're cutting through to a lot of people, given that social media has been restricted. Twitter is restricted in Russia, for example, and you have not a lot of reaction, it seems, from what I've seen on the tweets, certainly in Russian. How do you have any metrics on who you're actually reaching there in Russian?
There's obviously a challenge for all of us to reach out to the Russian population and to reach out to them, to give them proper access to verified and independent information. So what we are trying to do, we've developed our tools in Russian, as you say. We opened a Telegram channel. We are much more communicating on Twitter, on Instagram in Russian. But the thing is that the Russian authorities have actually limited very strongly the access for the Russian people to any kind of information coming from outside of Russia, in order to keep them in a bubble of propaganda that they are actually displaying both in Russia, but also towards the rest of the world. So this is a challenge for all of us. It's a challenge for diplomacy, but you see also an effort from the rest of the international community to support Russian journalists, independent journalists that managed to flee Russia and that are now operating from other places in Europe, in order to keep broadcasting, keep reporting on the war in Ukraine, but on a different perspective than the Russian propaganda.
I'm just interested also in what you're doing on social media in Africa. Again, this is only recent tweets and Telegram posts that I've seen that you've put out in Russian. There hasn't been anything recently on Mali, for example, which is a big information war. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you're going to increase in the coming weeks or months, for example?
We've done already a lot of work on Mali and in Africa in order to counteract disinformation spread both by state actors and non-state actors. And this is obviously something that we are looking at very closely, and this is something we will continue doing in the coming months.
More generally, in terms of Africa, a lot of observers here have said that France has lost some influence to Russia and China in general on the African continent. Is there a plan a concrete plan to counter that? Because if not, it's just words, isn't it, at an ambassadors' conference about we should do this or we should do that. So is there actually something concrete to regain France's influence in the Sahel, in Guinea, in the Central African Republic and other countries?
The President and Minister Colonna put it very clearly in their speeches to the Conference of the Ambassadors. We are defining a new partnership with Africa, and this has actually started from the very beginning of the first mandate of President Macron with the Ouagadougou speech. And this new partnership is now, giving fruits on the ground. We had different stages, and this idea is to give more space also to the civil society and building new relationships with the African state that are based on their needs and are based on their agenda. And we have actually started with a great summit that took place at the beginning of this year under the French presidency of the European Union. And it was the first meeting between the African Union and the EU. And we have actually decided on that summit to actually fund infrastructure in Africa for 150 billion euros. So this is part of this new partnership to answer the needs of the African Union.
Isn't China pursuing its investment a lot more aggressively, should we say, or more forcefully than France right now?
We are seeing other partners, working in Africa, developing, of course, their interest in Africa. China is one of them. And we've been also looking very closely at the level of debt, because you know that, unfortunately, some of the investment brought by China have also increased very heavily the level of debt for the African state. And this is a subject of worry for us.
Let's bring it back to Europe and Ukraine, because obviously a lot of President Macron's speech focused on this. Do you get the impression that the West is now running out of steam, that it's run out of road on these sanctions, and talk about, visa bans is perhaps a sign of desperation, that the EU doesn't know what to do while the Russian ruble is actually pretty strong, Russia reselling its oil through Saudi Arabia and not suffering as much as the West thought it would back in February?
No, I think you need to look at the impact of these sanction packages. So we adopted 6+1 sanction packages that are completely unprecedented for the European Union, and that actually bearing a very weight, very weight on the Russian economy. So if you look at the projection for the Russian economy, the growth there will be reduced by 6% for the GDP in 2022. So the impact of this sanction is working very well, and it will increase in the future, in the near future, because now we have decided to stop all the exports of coal. By the end of the year, 90% of the exports of oil coming from Russia to Europe will be suspended. And on gas, of course, we've seen that we managed to decrease our dependency to Russia from 50%, which was the case a few months ago, to 9% only. So this will have a great impact on the revenue of the Russian state.
Of course, Russian oil is still being sold on world markets. That is perhaps the focus of a future oil price cap. But unless that happens, presumably, Russia's economy will not do as badly as expected. You did mention the 6% forecast. I've seen others from JP Morgan, Citigroup, that talked about perhaps a 3.5% drop in output. So less. I think there are different estimates.
Yeah, but I think you need to look at it. You mentioned the agreement we managed to get in the G7, which is a cap on oil prices, which will have an impact on the oil prices. And you should look also at the effort made by Russia to divert its exportation and find new, new countries to sell its oil and gas. And what we see is that they are selling at a very low price. So it's the matter of revenue will not be at the benefit of Russia at the end of the year. And we need also to look at the low investment rate in Russia, because most of the global groups have left Russia. They are not investing anymore in this country. So they might at the moment get a lot of revenue, but they are actually incapable to invest in their own economy because they don't have the company to work with, and they don't have also the technology to build their economy because they are under sanction on most of the high-tech, spare parts that they would need to build their economy, and also their defense system actually.
Let's two very quick questions because we have very little time now. Anne-Claire Legendre, on the new British Prime Minister, do you think there's any room for optimism for France, or is this just going to be more of the same?
So yesterday you saw that President Macron congratulates Prime Minister Liz Truss for election as the new Prime Minister of the UK, and he recalled, how a long friendship we have with the UK, and that we should be up to this friendship, and we hope that the relationship we will build with the new Prime Minister and the UK in this new political conundrum will be up to the friendship we enjoyed with the UK nation.
Just one final point. French senators are set to arrive in Taiwan this Wednesday. Is that a bad idea?
There is separation between executive and legislative, in France, so I'm not to comment on any visit by our parliamentaries.
Do you think, though, this is a time when France and China should try and calm things down, though?
Indo-Pacific is clearly one of the priority, and the president made it very clear in his speech that this remained very high on our agenda. What we are doing at the moment is building new partnership in this region. India is clearly, a very important partner for us, and we will continue to reinforce our partnership. We also work with Indonesia, who holds the presidency of the G20, and as you know, we are rebuilding our relationship with Australia. So for us, this region is a priority. And you were mentioning Taiwan, and we had the occasion to express ourselves both at national level, but also with the G7, that we are very attentive, of course, to what's happening there. And we want the status quo to be preserved in the Strait of Taiwan. And we need to avoid any escalation in this region. So that's the message we are conveying to our partners.
Thank you so much. We'll have to end it there. Anne-Claire Legendre, Foreign Ministry spokesman for the French Foreign Ministry here in Paris. That's all we have time for this edition of The Interview. Thank you for watching.